Right, it's time to interview our government minister this morning because Britain has bought an extra 60 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. That's more than double our supply ahead of a booster programme later on this year.
Yeah, we're joined by the Vaccines Minister, Nadhim Zahawi. Good morning to you, Mr Zahawi. Thank you for joining us this morning. So let's talk about these boosters, these 60 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. When will we be able to get hold of these boosters and how's that going to work for people with regards to getting the booster?
Good morning. So you will remember that we began vaccinating the most vulnerable, so residents of care homes and those who look after them, the over 80s, the over 75s and the over 70s, and those who are clinically extremely vulnerable back on the 8th of December with the Pfizer vaccine and then on the 4th of January with the AstraZeneca vaccine. What we're doing now is planning ahead and to give the clinicians, the scientists, as many options for future-proofing the vaccination boost and the vaccination program next year. This is part of it. So Pfizer vaccine works incredibly well and could work as a boost in the autumn. The NHS is already making plans of how we would operationalise that, how it would dovetail with the flu vaccination program in the autumn. But we also have the Novavax vaccine, which also looks like a good candidate because it works against the dominant variant, the Kent variant, and the South African variant really effectively. The Valneva vaccine being made in Scotland, and of course AstraZeneca itself and the AstraZeneca vaccine variant that they're developing with the Oxford team.
Got these 60
so we want
million...
to give as many options to the clinicians. So Chris Whitty, our Chief Medical Officer, with the Chief Medical Officers of Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, can make a decision as to when do the most vulnerable need that boost. Right. But we have to be ready, both in terms of supply, hence the announcement on Pfizer today, but also in terms of how we deploy. And the NHS is making those plans as we speak as well.
So potentially the booster could come in the autumn if Chris Whitty decides that's the right time to do it, or it may be delayed to the start of next year. But is this something that we can expect for the foreseeable future, having a booster to top up our jabs?
So you're absolutely right. So the scientists and Chris Whitty will decide when is the appropriate time to boost against the virus or any variants of concern. There is a COV boost clinical trial that Jonathan Van Tam, his deputy, talked about last night to see which jab boost would be the most effective. So that will tell us which vaccine will be the best one to use, hence why we're future-proofing it. In terms of the future beyond that, hopefully we'll be in a world where we move from pandemic to endemic in the way we deal with flu, as Matthew Hancock talked about yesterday, and we'll have an annual COVID vaccination program, depending on which variant is the one that the scientists and the clinicians globally decide is the one that's most of concern, in the way we do with flu. So it'll be an annual, or depending on the science, similar to the flu vaccination program. And that's also something that we want to make sure we plan ahead. The UK, by the way, by next year, will have the capability to manufacture about 600 to 700 million doses of the different vaccines and the technologies, whether it's messenger RNA with CureVac or with Moderna and Pfizer, or the other more traditional vaccines like the Valneva vaccine or AstraZeneca or Novavax. So we will be one of the largest manufacturers in the world for vaccines next year.
Do you know what?
And that puts us in a good place.
Mr Zahawi, we want to congratulate you, frankly, and the NHS, because the vaccination programme has been a massive success story, and we've seen the effectiveness that it has on people and their, the reduced chance of getting COVID, of being hospitalised or worse with COVID, and also the transmission, the effect it has on transmission and reducing that is absolutely fantastic. And that is a positive story. However, right now there is a negative story that surrounds Downing Street and the Prime Minister, and that is about how he paid for the redecoration of the Downing Street flat. Viewers and voters might say, well, what does it matter? And I know that ministers, when they come on to talk about it, say, you know, it's just, it doesn't matter. In the scheme of things, it's very small. However, it does, doesn't it? Because this is about transparency. This is about declaring where you get money from. This is about knowing whether, as a voter, whether there's any kind of implied quid pro quo when it comes to a loan. Did the Prime Minister initially pay for the decoration and refurbishment of his flat, or did that money come from someone or somewhere else?
So thank you for your very kind words, and I stand on the shoulders of the real heroes and heroines of this deployment campaign, the NHS doctors, nurses, GPs, pharmacists, and the 80,000 vaccinated volunteers and 200,000 volunteers, our armed forces who are integrated 101 Logistics Brigade into the deployment, our local government finding the sites. It's been a sort of a Dunkirk spirit of people coming together. So thank you, by the way, and thank you, GMTV, for everything you've done to communicate how important it is to get vaccinated. And the British people just get it, and you can see it in the numbers.
GMB now. It's not been GMTV since 2010, but
we stand on the shoulders of
we
giants
do as
too.
well. The show has always been here.
If you can just talk about the Downing Street, because the Times this morning reporting that Downing Street's concerned about the paper trail. The Electoral Commission, as we know, has launched an investigation. It's quite serious, this issue, because it speaks to the government and the Prime Minister's integrity and transparency.
Absolutely, and it's really important that your viewers will be asking themselves, you know, if this flat refurbishment was done, did we pay for it? Did the taxpayer pay for it? And they didn't. The Prime Minister paid for this very clearly. He set out that he paid for the refurbishment. Really important.
Okay,
the appointment of Lord Geit, who was Her Majesty the Queen's...
question, sorry to interrupt, but my question was, did he initially pay for it, or did the money come from somewhere else?
So I'm coming to that. So the Prime Minister said that he followed the ministerial code with the advice of his officials, and he's answered umpteen questions on this. What's really important for your viewers to know is Her Majesty the Queen's ex-private secretary, Lord Geit, has been appointed to look at this very carefully. He's a crossbencher in the House of Lords. Really important that he does his work, and the Prime Minister has said that if Lord Geit finds that the Prime Minister needs to make other declarations, then he will do those in the appropriate manner. We've got elections in 7 days' time. The Prime Minister set out a really positive stall, whether it's on the vaccination deployment or on the economic recovery and protecting people's jobs. You know,
it seems extraordinary, though, that we have this Lord Geit looking into it. We have the Electoral Commission investigating it. This is a very simple question and answer situation, isn't it? Who paid? I mean, why does it need two investigations to work out? Surely someone just
said it.
OK, but did he pay for it initially? I mean, that's the question he has to ask. Where did the money come from initially? There is another question, of course, that has to be answered. Keir Starmer asked him in the House of Commons yesterday whether he said these comments about he would rather see bodies piled high in their thousands than risk or call a third lockdown. Keir Starmer asked the Prime Minister that in the House of Commons yesterday. Did he say those words? Let's just have a listen to that exchange.
Can the Prime Minister tell the House categorically, yes or no, did he make those remarks or remarks to that effect?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker, and I think the right honourable gentleman is a lawyer, I'm given to understand. I think that if he's going to repeat allegations like that, he should come to this House and substantiate those allegations.
Well, somebody here isn't telling the truth. The House will have heard the Prime Minister's answer, and I remind him the ministerial code says, and I quote, "Ministers who knowingly mislead Parliament will be expected to offer their resignation." I'll leave it there for now.
If the source of that story goes on the record under oath, that would be a very awkward situation for the Prime Minister, wouldn't it?
So I'm glad you played that, Susanna, because the Prime Minister was very clear in his answer. Keir Starmer did a big sit-down interview with one of your colleagues on ITV last night with Robert Peston for 10 minutes. He had nothing to offer the electors who are voting in a week's time in terms of policy. And I have to say, I really worry for Kier, because I think P.T. Barnum would be proud of him in terms of bandwagoning on this. And if he doesn't come up with some policies that resonate with the voters in 7 days' time...
Starmer, are you worried for the Prime Minister, though, Nadhim Zahawi? Because Susanna's point still stands, doesn't it, that could be awkward if someone goes on the record and says that the Prime Minister did make those comments and the Prime Minister has stood at the dispatch box and has misled Parliament. Well,
the Prime Minister was very clear yesterday in both answering that question but also saying to Keir Starmer, if you have proof, come up with it, publish it. Keir Starmer did a 10-minute sit-down interview, big interview, for the leader of the opposition, 7 days out before an election, had no policy offer for the voters.
But nothing can be more important than whether we trust our Prime Minister. That's politicians. That's what this is about, isn't it?
And I think people trust the Prime Minister because he's delivered the largest vaccination programme in the history of this country by both investing very early in the supply of vaccines and empowering the NHS, our armed forces, local government, volunteers to come together to deliver the vaccination programme. They're also interested in 640 billion of investment in infrastructure, protecting jobs. The furlough scheme protected over 12 million, 13 million jobs.
We appreciate that that's the message that the government wants to send out.
At least we have a message. The problem for Keir...
Well, Keir Starmer's message is that we're led by major sleaze. I mean, that's not a good message, is it?
I think the public will be looking at this saying, who paid for the refurbishment? Not the taxpayer, not them. The Prime Minister paid for his own refurbishment.
So it doesn't matter who paid, as long as it wasn't the taxpayer. Is that your message? It doesn't matter if it was a donor, as long as it wasn't the taxpayer.
The Prime Minister was very clear that he paid for the refurbishment himself.
Okay. All right.
So the important thing for your viewers is next Thursday they'll be voting. Conservative councils offer lower taxes than Labour or Lib Dem councils. Okay. We've got an economic offer, a health offer, that is something that resonates with the voters. And it would be curtains for Kier if he doesn't come up with some policy.
Nadhim Zahawi, thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to have to leave it there.
It's for the voters to make that judgment, isn't it? Nadhim Zahawi, thanks very much indeed.